Isaiah chapter 3, and we're starting in verse 13. Isaiah chapter 3, starting at verse 13. But before I go any farther, I'd like to reiterate something in the past here that we discussed already, and it has to do with God taking away all the great men, and he puts women and children and rulers over the men, which actually it's children ruling the women, and then the women ruling the men. And then it digressed to where God said that they are like Sodom and Gomorrah. And I would like to stress that is exactly what we have seen today, especially in the churches. Men of God, preachers, let women start preaching in the churches, which is totally against the Bible, in 1 Corinthians and Timothy. And then, what's the next step after women preachers in the churches? Then we have the homosexuals and lesbians as pastors of churches. That's a digression. And it shows us that right here in Isaiah chapter 3. And that is what we have seen with our own eyes in the churches of today. So, now we're starting at verse 13 of Isaiah chapter 3. The Lord standeth up to plead, and standeth to judge the people. 14. The Lord will enter into judgment with the ancients of his people, and the princes thereof. For ye have eaten up the vineyard, the spoil of the poor is in your houses. So when these great men were in charge, they did not do right. They did not make sure that the weak of the country were helped, and instead they took advantage of them. And that is seen in the luxurious houses they were living in, and the things they had in their houses, which they would not have had if they didn't take advantage of the poor. 15. What mean ye that ye beat my people to pieces, and grind the faces of the poor, saith the Lord God of hosts. And this is figuratively speaking about grinding their faces. They took advantage of the poor so much, it was almost like taking a person, putting their face into the dirt, and with their hand on the back of their head, and twisting their hand to force their face farther into the dirt. And that's how God looked at it when they were taking advantage of the poor. Verse 16. Moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, that's arrogant, and walk with stretched forth necks, that's like being proud as a peacock, and wanton eyes, that's without moral restraint, walking and mincing as they go. In other words, they are walking in a way to try to attract the lust of men, and making a tinkling with their feet. So they have, little bells on their ankles. Verse 17, therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. So in other words, the Lord is going to make it so they don't have such beautiful hair, and they're going to be getting diseases in their scalp. And when it says he's going to discover their secret parts, this is make their immorality known publicly. Now God is punishing the country by making these women rulers over the men, but now you have the women getting proud against the man, because of their position. And now they're thinking they can get any man they want. They no longer want just one man. They're trying to attract, they just become whores. And we're going to see in here shortly that all the different things they decorated themselves with, which it doesn't make it wrong. These things are not necessarily wrong, how they decorated themselves, but that was their main emphasis. Their main emphasis was not, they had no fear of God whatsoever. They were not trying to please God. It was just 100% lustful pleasure, and that's why all their interest was in their outward appearance. And in the Bible here, God is against women, especially Christian women. They need to change their attitude in how they dress and what's really important. And in the New Testament here, the Apostle Paul wrote Timothy, one of the church leaders, and he said in 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10, in like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair, or gold, or pearls, or costly array. Broided hair is, having it all braided up. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's not your main emphasis, like I said. And that's what this is getting against that here. You say in verse 9, don't make this outward appearance your main emphasis. Verse 10, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works. Instead of making the most important thing the outward appearance, he's saying make the most important thing your good works that you do for the Lord. Same thing in Peter here, 1 Peter chapter 3, we'll start at verse 1. Likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands. Women today, they don't want to obey God. Rebellious women today. They call themselves Christians. They don't want to obey God. God says, be in subjection to your own husbands. Now, they won't be in subjection to their husbands for God's sake. But they'll go out and get a job and be in subjection to a man boss for money's sake. And so, therefore, what they have done is made money. That means money is their God and not the God of the Bible. And that's what God is trying to get back. That's what God is trying to rebuke these women about in Isaiah. But as we continue here in 1 Peter 3:1, likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may be won without the word. They also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. In other words, they've already heard it before. And, wives, how they keep preaching to their husbands, and the husbands heard it before, and they're rejecting, and the wives are not submitting themselves to their husbands. That's not how they're going to get their attention. It says that basically most husbands, or a lot of husbands, can be won if their wife would quit trying to overrule them and just be submissive. This is people that's already heard the word. So this is without the word. They're going to be won by the conversation or the lives that their wives live. Verse 2, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. In other words, they're going to notice how you carry yourself in fear and trembling, not in respect. In other words, they just respect their husbands. They reverence their husbands. Verse 3, whose adorning, let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting of the hair. There we have the braiding again. And the wearing of gold or of putting on of apparel. So here it again, it is saying, do not make the main emphasis, wives, the outward appearance. Verse 4, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God a great price. So basically, God is saying here, don't be a loudmouth woman. Be submissive to your husband. This is not saying that a woman needs to take all kinds of abuse from her husband who's a tyrant. This is not saying a woman needs to take getting beat up every night by her husband. No, that's not what this is saying. But this is saying here that do not make the main emphasis your outward appearance, but let it be a godly woman's heart. Let that be the main emphasis there. But these proud women here that God, as a judgment to Israel, put them over to man, well, they got all proud about it. And they would not just have one man. And they're just dressing themselves up, trying to attract, all kinds of choice men. And basically, like I said before, they were whores. Just whores walking around, dressing to attract the lusts of men. And that was their main emphasis. So that's why God is rebuking the women here now. He took away all the great men, put women in charge, but now the women are sinning more against the Lord. So now God's rebuking them, saying what their punishment is going to be. Okay, and then so verse 18, in that day the Lord will take away the bravery, that's the showy display, of their tinkling ornaments about their feet, and their cauls. A caul is a net for the hair. Something they have fancy nets for hair. And their round tires like the moon. And that is something else, some other kind of headdress that they would put on their heads. And you're going to notice some of these things we're going to mention here is going to sound like automotive parts. And realize in Isaiah's day, there were no automotives. When the King James Bible was translated in 1611, there were no automobiles. And so, like I said, the round tires here, round tires like the moon. These words in the King James Bible, they were later used to for automobile parts because of, tires being round and these other things that it's going to mention here, whatever their significance was. So these names that we use for automobiles now were names used for other things before. Verse 19, continuing, talking about the different things. It's going in detail of all these things that these women were decorating themselves with. The chains and the bracelets and the mufflers. Now, a muffler is a little veil that covers the face, covers the mouth. Doesn't necessarily muffle women, but it just covers the mouth. 20, the bonnets and the ornaments of the leg, and the headbands, and the tablets. Tablets are little square decorations instead of the ornaments, and the earrings, the rings, and the nose jewels. 22, the changeable suits of apparel. So, lots of different types of clothes to wear, lots of shoes, lots of other kinds of apparel. And the mantles. A mantle is a cloak, a loose garment. And the wimples, that's a veil. And the crisping pins. Crisping pins are like curling irons. The glasses, mirrors, lots of mirrors to see how they look. And the fine linen and the hoods. A hood is something that went over the head too. And the veils. So God is going into detail here of all the things. This is a rebuke for the women. And he's going into detail, just reminding them of all the different things that were very important to them in their outward appearance. And they did not care about pleasing God. They were living for the lust of the flesh. And so all they cared about was their outward appearance. 24. And it shall come to pass that instead of sweet smell, there shall be stink. In other words, when this destruction comes upon Jerusalem, there's going to be no more of a perfume smell. And instead, there's just going to be the smell of dead bodies, stink. And instead of a girdle, a rent. And a rent is, instead of nice, tight clothing or whatever, it's going to be ripped. That's what rent means, ripped. And instead of well-set hair, baldness. Now realize these are judgments of God upon a sinning nation. And we can see today that a lot of these things are happening on us today. We put, as we learn the Bible, as we learn the New Testament, we can understand now why things happen and why things are the way they are. Just because a woman starts losing her hair and her hair starts thinning, it doesn't necessarily mean she did anything wrong herself, but as a sinning nation, that is part of the judgment of God upon a nation. And when God judges a nation, both the sinner and the Christian suffer. That's why we need to be preaching repentance, not only to get people saved, but try to withhold the hand of judgment on our nation, because it will affect us Christians also. And it says, instead of a stomacher, that a stomacher is something that women would put on to make their front look bigger. And instead of a stomacher, a grinding of sackcloth, and burning instead of beauty. Burning is ugliness. And so one of the judgments of God upon a sinning nation is he starts taking away the beauty of women. I'm talking about in looks. And he starts making women look ugly, physically ugly. 25. Thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in war. And so any of the men that are left that have any kind of manliness and strength, God is going to destroy most of them, and they're going to die in war. That is part of the judgment of God, too. Why do we have World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War? Why the Korean War? Why we have all these that took away so many men, so many great men? And that's when women started working in factories, and women started doing men's jobs. Women started dressing like men and wanted to be like men. It's part of the judgment of God on a sinning nation. Yes, we were sinning way back then, and God's judgment was upon us, not as much as it is today, but it was still upon us. 26. And her gates shall lament and mourn. Her gates, that is Jerusalem's gates. And this is not physically they're going to cry, but this is just a picture of how the gates of the city are going to be sad, because there's not going to be people traveling through them like people would during a festival. No, people, because of the destruction that's going to come on Jerusalem, people are going to be scarce. People are going to be sick. People are going to be just laying around, wounded, sick. It says, and her gates shall lament and mourn, and she being desolate shall set upon the ground. This is talking about Jerusalem now, and she's going to be so desolate. It's just like going to be a woman who had all of her family killed, her house burned, there's nothing left for her, her clothes are all worn, and she's just sitting on the ground in despair. And that's how Jerusalem is going to be here. That's how God is describing it. Chapter 4 and verse 1. And in that day, you'll notice it says that quite a bit here in Isaiah. And sometimes it's talking about the day of judgment for Jerusalem with Nebuchadnezzar. Sometimes it's talking about when Jesus comes back and the destruction from that when he comes back for his second coming. And sometimes it's talking about during the millennium. And so it just depends on the context of what that is talking about when it says in that day. You can notice it says it quite a few times here. And in that day, 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name to take away our reproach. The reason this is said here is because men are going to be scarce after we just heard about how they're going to be all taken away in war. And so obviously there's not enough men for all the women. And so the women want to have children. And so they're saying, give us children and you don't have to be responsible. And we'll just raise them ourselves because, we are self-sufficient. We can take care of them ourselves. That kind of reminds me, although it's a different situation, that kind of reminds me of the attitude of a lot of women today in America, Europe maybe. And they really don't want the man around being the head of the house. They want to be the head of the house. And so many of them have the attitude, we only want the man around to give us children. And then after we have children by them, we are self-sufficient. We have our jobs. We have government aid, whatever it might be. We don't need the man anymore. So after they have their children, they kick the man out, and now the man cannot be the head of the house anymore because the women do not want that. That's ungodly women I'm talking about. Godly women who want to follow God and understand the importance of, godly leadership, they respect this, and they don't try to override it. But that's what's happening here. That's what reminded me of here in chapter 4, verse 1 of the American women today. Even in a lot of churches, women who claim to be Christian, they want to rule the house, and they don't want the men correcting the children. They look at it as they're attacking they don't realize it's the man's child too. But they look at it as the man attacking the children, so they step in between. They feel like they're protecting their children against their husband, who is just trying to get the children to be responsible, trying to get them to do right, clean their room, to obey. But the women are against that. And usually the women reap what they sow. They get rid of the man. The boy becomes a bum. And she becomes a whore usually because she'll go whoring around with other men. Then the daughters grow up to be whores. And that is the repercussions. That is the repercussions and the consequences of not following God, not fearing God, not wanting the God of the Bible.